I'm not explaining this well. I don't have emotions. So, can you hear my cat yelling? Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Bells. It's so lovely to have you here. I didn't do a December wrap up and I've got a lot of cool books that I want to talk about with you. So let's just do it. Let's just bring on the books. The last wrap up that I did was in November, but I recorded it not quite at the end of the month. So I wound up not including Pet Sematary by Stephen King. So I'll start there. I'm like super conflicted on this book. If you guys don't know what this book is about, this family moves into a house that's like right off the freeway. They have a kid and a cat. And in the woods behind the house, there's like this cemetery for pets where all the kids in the neighborhood will like bury their dead pets. But there's like a secret actual cemetery like 2 miles beyond that cemetery, like deep into the woods. And basically this family moves in, this cat dies, and the dad and like the weird neighbor across the street go to the real Indian burial ground, which is, it's called an Indian burial ground, which already is like a red flag, and like bury the cat there, and then it comes back to life as like a zombie cat. That's like basically the premise of the book, and it's a story about like grief and how grief makes monsters of us all. I literally hated reading this book. I was upset the whole time. And the way that it's written is really detached. So I didn't feel like I was getting any emotional release from all the things that were happening in this book. Basically, what upset me the most about it is the content. Like if I had known what it was about, I probably wouldn't have read it. Spoiler alert, their kid dies. And so the dad spends the rest of the book trying to figure out how to bring his kid back to life and like wrestling with that. I like didn't want to read about a 2-year-old dying. I don't want to read about a funeral for a 2-year-old. I just like don't. And then also all of the like the indigenous culture that was just so horrendously appropriated in this book was really uncomfortable. You can really tell it was written in '83. And I just didn't enjoy reading it. Again, I really like his writing. I think his writing is really lovely. And I think he captures the tone of this book that he's trying to capture really well. But he says in the intro that this was a book that wasn't meant to be published. Like he wrote this book and put it in a desk. The only reason it came out was to fulfill a contractual obligation. So I think that says a lot about the story. I can see why people really like it because it does approach these issues that we're not really ever allowed to talk about. I just can't. That's it. So that was Pet Sematary. That was how I felt about that. I read Dune in the last couple months. If you haven't seen my readathon where I talk about Dune the whole time, it's a 24-hour readathon and I get real loopy. You should go check it out. It's fun. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I read this book, No Heaven for Good Boys by Keisha Bush. And it was very lovely. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was great. And I want to talk about it because it's a book I haven't seen a lot on a lot of book-related social medias, which I think is really weird. It was written really simplistically in a way that really captured the feelings of being a child. Let me preface with like what this is about. It's about a group of boys in Africa called the Taliban, and basically they are boys that are sent off with like tutors essentially to make their way in the world. Their mentors or their masters are their guardians until age 15, so their parents can't really do anything about it. But most of the time they're not actually learning anything. They wind up like going into the streets to beg for money to avoid getting abused by their masters even more. This book is absolutely devastating. It's from the perspective of 2 boys who are going through this. The writing was really, like I said, like really simplistic, really to the point. You're not questioning what's happening here. There wasn't a lot of subtext. Like you knew exactly what was going on in every page of the book. And I think that made it hit a lot harder. I really like this style of writing for such heavy topics because I think it's important to just address these things like as they actually are. I felt like I learned something reading this book. I feel like that happens when you read books about other cultures. Like you're gonna learn something. That's why we should be reading books from other cultures. I'm glad I took the time to read it, but like it was really devastating. Not in the way where I sat and cried for like an hour after reading it, but just in that like soul depressing way. So read it when you're in good mental health. There's a lot of really unfortunate things that happen to children in this book. So I would say just like keep that in mind. Onwards. Oh my God. Okay. So I've been talking about the house in the cerulean sea a lot, and I'm gonna keep this brief because I'm planning on doing a whole separate video just for this book because I Loved this book. This one was like one of the last books that I read last year and it came out on top as my favorite book of the entire year. This was the most like beautiful and unique book I've ever read. It's a fantasy, it's a found family story, and it's so gay and I love it. I don't know what the most comforting thing in the world is for you, but that comforting thing was this book. This is all comfort, it is all love. I don't remember the last time I sobbed from like pure happiness that much, maybe ever. I know that's really dramatic. That's just how I feel about this book. I just think that like everyone deserves to read it. It's just so sweet. The writing is adorable and magical. It's super whimsical. It's romantic. Just do it. Just do it. Just read it. Okay, moving on. I want to talk about the Court of Thorns and Roses books. So I read the first two in the last couple months. I did not think I was gonna like it. I don't read a lot of new adult. Didn't know that even was a genre until I looked up what this book genre was supposed to be. So this was my first one in a long time. I cannot say I loved them, but I also can't say I hated them. There's really something special about those like beach reads, those trashy escapist novels where fucking every chapter has a new plot point that you have to follow, and you can tell that the author is like straight up just like writing to keep your attention, and it is just like a whirlwind, and it's kind of like exhausting to read, but there's something really lovely about it, and you can just sit and like pound through these books because they're just that ridiculous and you just have to know what happens. That's how I feel about them. I didn't love the first one. I think the first one is a very poor start to a series, honestly, because it presents a romance that isn't super believable, and it also presents a romance that doesn't even fucking matter for the rest of the series, which is absolutely wild. To me, like starting a series with a romance and it's like a fantasy romance, like that's its thing, and starting it with a romance that then doesn't go anywhere is ridiculous. Why would you write an entire book about a romance that in the next book you're just gonna destroy completely? I just feel like there is probably a more creative way of doing that that doesn't completely ruin the first book for you. These books definitely suffer from the I'm not like other girls tropes. I don't like dresses and I don't like being pretty and I don't think I am pretty. It definitely suffers from that. So I'm not like pretending this has good world building. It doesn't. Or even like good character arcs. It doesn't. But I also am really invested in it. The only thing I know about Sarah J. Maas before I read this was that there was some kind of controversy, but I didn't know what it was, and now I'm gonna look it up. I know she's supposed to be problematic, but I don't know why. The LGBTQIA community have expressed that she needs to show some representation in her books without feeling the need to kill them off or keep them as a side character. I mean, valid, it's real white and real heteronormative. They don't feel particularly problematic to me. My biggest issue with the books before I read the second one is that the romance in the first one is real possessive and obsessive and toxic, and I don't love it. But like she leans into it and they kind of like figure it out in the second book. And I presume that gets better. I really couldn't tell you. I'll keep you guys updated on how I feel about the next few. But yeah, I wanted to talk about those books because I feel like I've seen them everywhere and everyone's got to weigh in on Sarah J. Maas or whatever. They're not like the best written, the best characters, the best world building. They don't even really say a lot about the world that we're in, really anything at all. But they are fun. And you know, sometimes you just need a good trash read. So I'm gonna leave it there. I read this lovely book, When We Were Orphans by Kazuo Ishiguro, and it was great. The writing is phenomenal in this book. If you really like atmospheric writing, that's more about like you feeling a certain tone than it is necessarily about like pushing the plot or a character forward, you'll probably really like it for that. I didn't love it. I don't love books like that. My biggest need in books is like a really good character arc that's focused in through the narrative. And so this one just didn't really have that. It's written in kind of like diary entries. It's so incredibly intimate that I actually almost like wanted to stop reading at some points because it felt almost inappropriate for me to read. It was that intimate. It really captures like the way that our minds go. When you're thinking about things and you kind of go off on like little tangents and flashbacks and stuff like that, or when you're writing in your diary like that, that might be a neurotypical thing. But I think in that concept, man, did he capture that so well. I think the presentation of like the mind and memories as being ever increasingly fallible, and that we can never like wholly trust our memories of things. Oh man, it was so cool the way that he weaved all of that together. I'm definitely gonna read more of his books. Even though I didn't love this one, I absolutely loved the way that he wrote it. What else did I read? Oh, I finally read Song of Achilles. Look at me reading all the hyped books at the very end of last year. Song of Achilles was great. If you don't know, it's like the story of Achilles. Obviously, it's the story of the Iliad through Patroclus's perspective and like their love story. It was really lovely. It was really sad. I cried. I gave it 4 stars. And the reason that I did not give it 5 stars, and I had a similar issue with Silence of the Girls, which I read earlier last year, is that I just don't love like super linear stories. And unfortunately, Greek retellings happen to be quite linear because they're fucking poems. They're poems. There's like only so much you can do there. I thought it was really good. The other thing though that really put me off this book a little bit was I read Silence of the Girls earlier last year, which is the story of the Iliad from Briseis' perspective, who is a slave, like Achilles' war prize, basically. And in this book, she's presented as kind of like a co-conspirator with Patroclus and Achilles, and like as like a fairly willing character. And I understand that it's a really specific retelling of the story. It's not from that perspective, but like I truly just couldn't get past the concept of putting a female slave essentially in that light. And I understand that it was a different story that was presented in A Song of Achilles. I get it, but I couldn't get past it. I didn't not like it. I really liked it. I thought it was great. I think it lived up to the hype. I can see why people absolutely loved it. But the female experience has often been erased from history in that way. And while I totally understand that this book wasn't really about that, I just couldn't get past it. You know what I mean? Like I just couldn't. It just was a little bit like weird and icky after having read Silence of the Girls. So yeah, it was really full of love and really fucking sad. All these fucking popular books make me cry. Guys, I'm not here for it. I don't have emotions. What else did I read? Oh my God, I read Drums of Autumn. Okay, guys, so look, Outlander, I have a lot of feelings about Outlander. The short version is I don't condone the first book and the climax of the first book and the relationship in the first book at all. I think it's incredibly inappropriate and really damaging. And that's not the ending with Jack Randall. That is like the ending between Claire and Jamie. However, the rest of the series is really, really good. You get a really nice idea of the modern perspective from Claire and a historical like 1700s perspective from Jamie. If you don't know what Outlander is about, it's basically about this woman from the 40s who like time travels back to the 1700s and falls in love with a Scottish Highlander and gets involved in a lot of wars and stuff. That's like the gist. It's a really spicy, steamy romance. Real passionate, all passion. Every installment of the series gets better and better to me. And then I read Drums of Autumn, which is what I'm talking about right now. Drums of Autumn was 1,000 pages. I could probably kill someone with that book if I had like the upper arm strength to do it. Drums of Autumn is the most domestic, the most cozy, the most long-winded story. I really, really, really loved it. It was like really soothing of a book, which is wild because if you know anything about the story, it's like really dark. But for whatever reason, this book was like so comforting. And Diana can get real carried away in her writing. My mom put it as very indulgent. She's very indulgent when it comes to writing. You'll listen to like fucking 4 pages on the description of the forest. It's also written so well, and she's so good with her relationships, and it all pays off in the final quarter of the book. And so you're not like really mad about the fact that it's 1,000 pages for seemingly no reason, because it doesn't feel like it's no reason. And I don't know what it was about this one, but it just felt like it had so much more heart and so much more love and compassion in it. It felt the most like slice of life out of all of her books, if I can describe it that way. Definitely the best one so far. The one that made me like feel the best as a person, like while I was reading it. We're in January now, by the way. What else did I read? Oh, I read Coraline. Oh my God, So I went into a slump after Drums of Autumn because I read Court of Mist and Fury and Drums of Autumn back to back, and I like blew through both of them. And then I booked myself out. So I just didn't read anything for like a week. I jumped back into reading with Coraline, thanks Neil, and this was lovely. This is a middle grade book. It's written for kids. You can tell it's written for kids. The sentence structure is pretty basic. But Neil Gaiman says himself that it's a story that kids feel is an adventure and that adults get nightmares about. And I think that is really accurate. It's really ageless. It feels fantastic. I wish I had read this when I was a kid. I would have just fucking loved it. I think it's totally worth it. I am obsessed with the movie. I love the movie. I watch it 4 times plus a year, easy. So reading this book, of course, like I heard everything in those voices, but the story and like the way that things happen in the book is different enough from the movie to where I don't feel as though I was just rereading the same story just like for the sake of it. You know what I mean? If you haven't read this, I read it in like 2 hours. It's short, it's an easy read, it's super creepy. It's super creepy. You should read it. Before I get to my favorite book, one of my new like top 5 favorite books that I've ever read, I want to talk briefly about The Handmaid's Tale. So I love the show, and so I wanted to read the book. It's really classic feminist literature. It's something that's been adapted to TV and film multiple times. And guys, I really didn't like it. I'm like legitimately upset that I didn't like this book. I tried to like this book the entire time I was reading it, and I just like didn't. And let me talk about why. So the story is about like a dystopian future where most people are sterile, and in America they basically turned it into like this weird creepy religious republic based off of the new Bible, where women who are fertile are basically given to powerful families and are basically like walking wombs for the leaders of the world. Really dark, really great. The way that it was written was so passive and so detached and so underwhelming. I like couldn't get into it. It almost felt as though Margaret Atwood did not want to do any character work in this world, but instead wanted to like focus on the world building, which like, I get it. You can very clearly see that. The world building is really lovely. Like I said earlier, I'm a big, like I need character arcs in my stories for me to really like them. I can absolutely admire the world building that's happening here and the discussion that Margaret Atwood is having about the world. And it's a really dark place to go for a story like that. And so I really respect that. But honestly, like the book felt as though it was 50% metaphor and didn't have a super clear purpose. It's speculative fiction, right? So it's kind of just like, what would happen if, and just like exploring that world. I just don't think I like speculative fiction, guys. And I'm like really surprised that I feel this way about this book. It's just wasn't for me, but I'm like really upset that it wasn't for me. I really wish that it was. It's a bummer. It's a real bummer. So that was The Handmaid's Tale. So I'm gonna end this video off with one of my new favorite books. So The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, friends. Preface, I don't like thrillers. I don't read thrillers, and when I do read thrillers, I am like 99% of the time bored and underwhelmed. Western thrillers specifically, pretty much I find generally just focus on the plot twist. That's like the big selling point of the book. It's like, wow, the plot twist was crazy. And that's like the book. I guess not all thrillers are written that way. This is a Norwegian thriller, and from reading the introduction of this book, I guess that Norwegian thrillers are a little bit more activism focused, and this was so fucking good. I like can't begin to explain how much I love this. The characters, first of all, are beautiful. I absolutely love the character of Lisbeth Salander. I would die for that woman. I love her. And then the reporter, who is Mikael Blomkvist, is such an interesting person and such a genuine person. And through this book, we know that Stieg Larsson is commenting on female exploitation. So like the thing that it's commenting on, I think it did really successfully. It's clear that Stieg Larsson did so much work for this book. It's clear it's something that he cares about a lot. It's clear that he spoke to a lot of women and their experiences, which is the most important thing about writing a story with this kind of heavy subject matter. Definite trigger warning. Like if you get triggered by sexual assault content, this is not for you. It is really heavy, but not nearly as graphic as I thought it was gonna be based off of all of the talk around the book. So like, don't run away from it if you're a little bit nervous about reading it. Please don't, because I think it's worth the read, and it's not quite as bad as I was expecting. It's still rough. Like, you're gonna need to be in like a good brain space to do this, but those scenes are done really tastefully. There's a lot of conversations about like tech in this book that went like right over my head. I felt like an old lady reading this book. Like, I don't know what you're saying. I read over some of those passages like 3 or 4 times. I was like, I'm just not ever gonna know what's happening here, so I'm just gonna move past this. The coolest thing about it, there's a lot of cool things about it. I could talk about this book for like forever. What I will say is the most interesting thing about this book is that the plot twist, it's a thriller where the plot twist is like the least interesting thing about it. And the plot twist is good. I guessed it a couple chapters before, but I think you were supposed to. That's pretty cool. I just think you should read this. If you're looking for something a little bit different, just do it. Just read it. Here, have mine. Okay, thanks so much for watching this whole ass video. Hopefully I cut it down to be shorter than an hour. Let's talk about books some more. Talk to me in the comments. Talk to me about if you've read these or want to read them or what you've been reading. I want to know what you guys have been reading. But yeah, thanks so much for hanging out. That's all I got for you today. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear me talk more about books, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos. Okay, bye.